Hello. It's July now. We've gone another month, and I've got to talk to you about all the books that I read in June. So here I am. Now, June was Pride Month, as we all know, and I wanted to spend the month just reading a whole bunch of kind of randomly assorted queer books that I was interested in. And I mostly succeeded. There's a couple books on here that really weren't part of that, but I was finishing them from like May. So I'm going to talk about the the 7 books that I read in June in order of how queer they were from least to most. Degree of queerness to be defined by me. Which means that we have to start with The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead, which was just like very straight. Nothing but straight people as far as the eye can see. It's a thriller, and I quite liked it. So this was like, basically this woman is listening to this podcast that a former friend from back in the day in high school makes, and it's it's like a true crime podcast, and she realizes that he's talking about a friend of hers from college who she hasn't talked to in like 10 years because she's like in her early 30s, right? She hasn't talked to her since they graduated, and this woman has just been found dead, apparently suicide. She hung herself on the campus of the college they went to, and she's like, wait, what the fuck? But she has a whole lot of knowledge about some crazy stuff that went down while they were in college, and also she feels bad because this girl was like her bestie, and then she just never talked to her again. So she goes back up to New York, to the town the college is in, and she calls up that old friend of hers on the podcast and is like, hey, do you want to talk? I want to talk to you about this because like I actually know some stuff that might be helpful. And so it turns out that she, this other girl, and some third other girl who actually killed herself when they were in college, were all involved in this sort of little cult. And then it just keeps getting progressively weirder. Like, not only does she keep telling her friend all of this just absolutely buck wild stuff that was happening in college, but they're also trying to investigate whether Laurel, the woman who's just died, was like involved in anything shady more recently, or I don't know. They're just trying to figure out like what she's been doing, and it just keeps leading further into these like weird sex clubs, and like it just gets odd. I enjoyed it though. It's pretty fucked up. And I felt like she wrote a very good, that fine line, right, between having a character where I'm like rolling my eyes at some of the stuff she says, but I still want to hear her story. I'm still interested, which I think is difficult to do for me, at least, because like a lot of the times she'll be like, I don't fucking care, okay? But I was able to care, so thank you, Ashley Winstead. You did a good job with that. Yeah, I thought it was good. Have not read any of her other books, but I've read this one now. Okay. Secondly, Cibola Burn by James S.A. Corey. Or possibly Cibola Burn, I don't know. This is book 4 of The Expanse, which I'm rereading because I want to finish it for real this time. Have not read the last book yet. Okay, so book 4 of The Expanse. Fantastic. Love this book. It's one of my absolute favorites of the series because this is the one where they go to that other planet and they're basically just spending the entire plot trying to not like die and trying to prevent the two groups of people from like killing each other, and it's just wild. I love this book and I love this series, and I wish to do nothing but read it. It is in second place because none of the major viewpoint characters are queer, but a number of random side characters are, so that's something, right? Yeah, but Cibola Burn is just, it's so good. It's so good. I love all the just, every time they turn around, a new terrible thing is happening, and I just enjoy that. And I also just really like stories where characters are trying to survive in an extreme circumstance, and this definitely qualifies. And I think, honestly, I think I liked it more this time around because I feel like, what am I saying? I feel like I was not that interested in several of the viewpoint characters when I first read it, but now, rereading it, I see their worth more, I guess. Okay, next, let's talk about Orlando by Virginia Woolf. So this is a book from my list of 20 books for the year, and I put it here because I knew that it was about this strangely long-lived young man who wakes up one day to find that he's become a woman and is like, oh, okay, and just kind of keeps going. And that's like really all I knew about it. So that is a thing that happens. It's a really strange book. Like, it's hard to explain it because I think that just describing it the way I already have doesn't really capture how weird it is. It's not weird because the main character suddenly like changes sex halfway through. Sorry, there's this wasp outside and I'm like, go away. It's weird because just the way it's written. It's like, okay, first of all, it's framed like a biography, as if some guy is writing this, because he has a certain, and it's definitely a guy, and he has a certain narrative voice as he's telling us about Orlando's life. But then also, if it's a biography, why is he spending so much time focusing on like, and then Orlando thought about this and this and this? How the fuck do you know? You can't read her mind. And, you know, just I've read a handful of biographies and this is not the way that they go. So it was just weird. And then also, Orlando is like a boy in Elizabethan England. And by the time the book comes to an end, it is basically the point when the book's being written in 1928. And it's interesting. It's like Orlando is sort of this avatar for this, the history of this family almost, except that he, and then later she, just keeps on going. And aging incredibly slowly, like, and having all of these different adventures. And oddly, the narrator keeps focusing on the less interesting stuff, and then just being like, yeah, and then Orlando spent several years as the ambassador to whatever. And I'm like, can we talk about that more? No? Okay. So it was interesting. And I don't know that I really liked it that much, but I'm glad I read it. I don't know. I feel like Virginia Woolf is part of a kind of, what were they, modernists or something? Like a group of authors at a particular time period, and I don't know if I jive with whatever they were putting down. I'm like, can we just have a story? Can there be a plot? Yes, okay. Can things happen? No? Why are we here? Okay. Which book should I talk about next? Okay, next I'm going to talk about my other list book, Station Eternity by Mira Lafferty. And I'm putting it in this spot because there were a number of major characters who were queer, but that was not, like, it was talked about, but it wasn't super relevant to the plot, I guess. To the point where at least with the main character, the fact that she's bisexual is like not important and you could forget about it. That's not the only example of a queer character, but it's just kind of like, okay, like that's not what this is about. We're on a space station having some fun. So this book was interesting, and I didn't love it, and I don't know why. But the premise is that this woman, which, expect me to remember the names of a character? Absolutely not. She is kind of like Jessica Fletcher. I mean, she actually is really like Jessica Fletcher because she writes murder mystery novels, you find out, and she's been using all of these murders that have taken place sort of in her vicinity throughout her life to write these books. And so it turns out there's kind of a reason for that, but you figure that out. She like figures that out by the end of the book. Earlier on, not at all. So it's kind of this joke of like, you know, if you watch a TV show or read a book series where the main protagonist is not actually a detective, but murders keep happening in their general vicinity that they keep solving, that's basically what this character is, except it's being played more straight. And maybe that's why I didn't fully love the book because I felt like elements of it were just were funny. Like it was almost trying to be this satire, but then it was like slightly too serious. I don't know. I think it's hard to balance that, and it just wasn't really working for me. But anyway, people keep dying around her is the point. Murders keep happening, and she's like really great at solving them, but they won't let her just, they won't even let her become a private eye, and she's like mad about that. But anyway, she decides that she's tired of people dying around her. So she's gonna get away from people, and so she goes to this space station that their first contact has recently happened, and there's the space station fairly near to Earth, in relative terms. And so she gets, how did she get there? Well, somehow she got to the space station. I'm gonna say that I think she hitchhiked or something with some aliens, right? But she basically begged the space station, which is sentient, to let her stay there, and she wants to stay away from humans. But then, as the book begins, she's discovered that a group of humans are coming to the station, and she's like, oh shit, oh no. And then of course everything starts to go kind of like crazy. And it is a murder mystery. There's a bunch of stuff going on. The characters all have these different connections to each other, and it is fun. Also, there's weird aliens. I felt like the aliens were not quite weird enough, but honestly, I was just being nitpicky at that point. I mean, I'd recommend it if that sounds like a fun time to you. I also suspect that it may become a series, but I'm not entirely sure. Also, it was just published like last year, so who knows. Okay, next I'm gonna say, oh boy, let's go with Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett. This one. Lovely Discworld book. One of my favorites, for sure. And it was like the second one I ever read, so I decided we're rereading it because I want to. And I still loved it. It was great. It's about this girl, Polly, who dresses up as a boy and joins the army of her shitty little country because she's looking for her brother, who is also in the army, and he's sort of missing, like she hasn't heard from him. And so she's like, I guess I gotta go rescue him or something. It's great. It's great. There's a lot of cross-dressing and a lot of war is stupid, why are we doing this type of storytelling from Terry Pratchett. And it's just a great book. It's funny, it's, I don't know, heartwarming in some ways. It's like it's delightful. And it has some stuff to say. Also, like all the stuff with like all the abominations of Nuggin and whatnot, and like the one girl being actually basically Joan of Arc, but for real, kinda. That makes sense. That was wild. Also kind of sad. Yeah, I mean, it definitely does that thing where I think Terry Pratchett at least is very good at combining things that are sad and horrifying with satire and humor and somehow making it balance. It's a good one. I mean, cross-dressing is funny. The whole thing with the socks is funny. Yeah, so anyway, excellent. Also, like, Vimes is in this book. He's in like 3 scenes, but I love him. So obviously that was, it was a kick. I got a kick out of seeing him. Okay, let's talk, oh boy, the last 2, I'm not sure which to pick as like the second most versus the first most queer book that I read this month, because I don't know. I'm gonna say Docile by K.M. Sbarra. This book was wild, okay? And I thought it was great. It's basically this dystopia, and it's really fucked up, because basically the idea is that debt kind of as a concept gets restructured in the future, and like in some cases you can tell that the author is like a paralegal, so like he's obviously spent some time thinking about like the legal aspects of some of this. But the idea is that suddenly like you can inherit debt. So everyone's got huge amounts of debt, and in order to pay it off, you can essentially sell yourself into a type of kind of indentured servitude, so that one of the trillionaires or whatever, horrifying, will pay off your debt, but you have to do whatever they tell you to for a certain length of time. And that could mean hard labor, or it could mean like literally sex slavery. But the mitigating thing is that you're supposed to be on this drug called Docile, which makes it so that you'll just do whatever people tell you, and also you don't actually remember anything that you do during that period of time. So the main character, he signs up to get rid of the debt of his parents, and mainly because he doesn't want his sister to have to sign up, because he intends to not use Docile, because his mother did while she was like working for 10 years doing who knows what. So, and it like worked, she doesn't remember anything, but also her brain hasn't like fully returned to normal function. She still acts like she's on it, even though it's been several years and she's like not. And the effects are not supposed to last. So he's like, well, I'm not gonna do that. And then he ends up getting bought essentially by his contract, I guess, gets bought by this young man who is the sort of heir to the company that invented Docile, and he's like a scientist who works on it. Also, he's a trillionaire. Also, oh boy, this book is a lot. Like, I don't want to tell you the whole plot, I guess, but it is a really interesting exploration of how Elisha, see, I remember their names, whatever, how Elisha gets brainwashed and broken down by Alex over the course of several months. And then this also messy, complicated relationship they have, because Alex kind of falls in love with Elisha, but then also is forced to realize like, but I'm not really, because he's only acting this way because of what I've been doing to him. And then wanting, basically he kicks him out. He's like, I'm gonna pay off your contract, but you're gonna go home and we're not doing this anymore. And Elisha by that point like is like fucked up and is really upset by having to leave Alex and like cannot function on his own. And then he's like trying to learn how to function on his own again. And also there's this lawsuit. I was not expecting a lawsuit, but there's a lawsuit, and like there's this whole thing. It's honestly like quite satisfying to read, because partway through the book I'm reading it and I'm like, where is this going? Like, I have read the further kind of continual breakdown of Elisha's personality, you know, how he has been, you know, essentially psychologically like tormented in many ways into submissivity. That's not a word, but you know, and I've read all these really not entirely, I guess, consensual sex scenes between him and Alex, and like it's pretty disturbing. And you know, I was just like, where is this going? Well, I want to tell you that it's going somewhere interesting. Like, there is a purpose to the madness, and it's really interesting to see Elisha like take steps to recover from all of that, and also to like deal with just a variety of kind of things that he has to like accept about what happened, and like just, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. And yes, there's a fair amount of sex in it. And it's not hot. I mean, it's kind of hot. I mean, you know, I guess there's the kind of issue is that most of it is Elisha and Alex, and that's always just kind of inherently like some degree of not exactly consensual because of the situation. But there's at least one definitely consensual sex scene toward the end with Elisha and a different character that I won't name. So that relationship was interesting too, for sure. So I heard it described at one point as kind of 50 Shades of Grey, but it's like gay, and I'm like, well, I don't think that's fair, you know, because this is unquestionably a much better book. So if you've ever heard that and you were like, ew, bruh, it's like, it has nothing in common with it. Besides, I guess, the sort of master-slave dynamic, but like that's, you know, it's there for a totally different reason. Also, it has I guess it has a little bit of what might be considered BDSM, but that's not really the focus of most of the sex stuff, so I don't know. Anyway, I really liked it. Now let's talk about the final book. The queerest book, I've decided, sort of arbitrarily, of the month was Death Claims by Joseph Hansen. I mean, it's tough to pick between this and Docile. Docile had numerous on-page male-male sex scenes, but Death Claims, I think, had more queer characters, and also is set in the real life, like, late 60s, and therefore the characters grapple with, I don't know, more things that actually have to do with homophobia adversely affecting their lives versus in Docile, there isn't really any homophobia in this particular future. Everything else is horrible, but nobody seems to care that the heir apparent of this company is gay. Like, it's not a problem. So, I mean, that's nice, because that's not what we're focusing on. But anyway, it's hard to pick between the two. But okay, Death Claims is the sequel to Fade Out, which I read last year, and it's a I can't speak English. It is a murder mystery series. The books aren't pretty short, but I just love the way they're written. Like, I just think he does such a good job of capturing the characters and the places. And it's all like the California coast, so there's just a lot to talk about with like these different towns and all these different houses and the different people's lives and how like, just, it's so good. Okay, so the main character, David Branstetter, he's sort of this, I don't know what to call him exactly, but he works for an insurance company, a life insurance company. And when something seems hinky, he goes to investigate. So in this case, this guy drowned while swimming, but an accidental death is what it was ruled by the coroner. And he's like, you know, don't love to see it. And the further he pokes into it, because the thing is that the guy was going to change his life insurance beneficiary, and he'd like asked for the forms, and they had kind of just arrived like the day he died, but so he hadn't filled them out yet. But that's obviously, you know, that is questionable. Like, did somebody know that he was going to change his life insurance beneficiary, and did they kill him for it? So, you know, obviously the whole book is Branstetter like looking into this, and it's really good. I mean, there are so many different suspects and possibilities, and there's also a subplot of Branstetter's relationship with this guy Doug, who he started dating after the first book. And that's kind of messy because they both are sort of replacing their dead lovers with each other. Yes, okay. And it ain't great, and it's not sustainable. And so that's something they kind of have to deal with in this book. But yeah, so I think it's a great series. I definitely want to keep reading it. This was a very good book. I feel like it was even better than the first one because just I thought it was just like more comprehensible, because the first one, the ending was kind of like, this happened, and then this person, and like there was too much happening at the end. In this one, I was like, okay, I get it. It did end kind of abruptly. He finds out who killed him, and then he confronts the guy, and then that's kind of it. I was like, that's like, well, the cops are coming, I'm gonna arrest him. I'm like, okay. We don't get like a single chapter at the end to wrap things up. No, we're done. Okay, bye. So, whatever. That's my only complaint. So it was like a really successful reading month. I love reading queer books, and it wasn't like the most variety that I could have gotten, but it was really just a bunch of stuff that I wanted to read. So, see you next month.